Maybe I'm power armor racist in that all giant suits of power armor look the same to me.
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
I'm Andy Hunter, a longtime fan of all things Nintendo.
I'm Kate. I've been writing software for over 10 years, but not the fun kind.
And here we are at the thrilling conclusion of our look at the Real Game Awards, which first launched in January of 2025 as a alternative to Jeff Keighley's Game Awards, created by a guy named Craig Skistimas, aka Stuttering Craig, who was one of the founders of Screw Attack, who said that he created this award show as a award show by gamers for gamers. Although, as we've talked about in these last several episodes, a lot of that means by gamers, and by gamers, the definition of gamers for this show is mostly people who align politically with Stuttering Craig, which is mostly in the anti-woke griftosphere circles, who are also willing to pay him money. And over the last several episodes, we went over this paid award show, some of the, let's say, colorful characters associated with it, and some of the things that they're particularly upset about in gaming. And it's not things like predatory monetization strategies, corporate consolidation, massive layoffs. No, it's, games have pronouns in them, and black and brown people, and our gaming ladies are just not hot enough anymore because of woke, I guess. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start wrapping up looking at one other notable talking point at the Real Game Awards. And then we're going to pivot into what the larger impact of this award show was as we wrap up our story. So going back to the Real Game Awards, last time we talked about, as you recall, we talked about Stellar Blade, which attracted a lot of, let's just say, discourse around its main character, Eve, and her various outfits that were censored. But this time around, we're shifting to another notable game that got a lot of attention at the Real Game Awards, which was Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2, which won Best Third-Person Shooter and received nominations for Best Multiplayer Experience, Best Action Game, Best Value, and Game of the Year. Anybody familiar with this game?
I'm not. Although I think I saw the Secret Levels episode about it. So I guess I have a very vague understanding of the universe. Involves Space Marines dressed in like super big suits of armor fighting monsters. I don't really remember much beyond that.
What about you, Kate?
Yeah, no, nothing.
All right, so let's learn about this game and the brand that's associated around it. So Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is a squad-based third-person shooter developed by Saber St. Petersburg and published by Focus Entertainment for the PS5, Windows, and Xbox Series on September 9th, 2024. Players assume the role of Titus, an ultramarine of the Imperium of Man, who along with his squad mates battles the ravenous hordes of the Tyranids, who for the uninitiated are basically like the bugs from Star Trek Troopers or the Zergs from StarCraft, in that they're a seemingly endless swarm of insectoid/xenomorph style monsters. Fun aside, I found a copy of Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 at the local library because they do allow you to check out games, and I checked it out. And I put it in my Xbox, only to realize that it's for the Xbox Series, and I only have an Xbox One, so I could not play it. So I have no opinions on Space Marine 2. I've heard fairly positive things, as we're going to talk about in a second, but I tried. I did try to play this game. The game attracted a positive reception from both critics and players, currently holding solid Metacritic scores of 8.0 out of 10 among fans and 82 out of 100 among critics. However, this didn't stop a veritable Tyranid horde of dude bros from Zerg rushing the comments of IGN's 8 out of 10 video review to complain that reviewer Chris Reed's overwhelmingly positive assessment wasn't praising the game enough. Because this is how some of these folks in the circle spend their time.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I was listening to an episode of Triple Click yesterday, which for either of you or for any listeners, if you don't know, it is 3 video game reporters, or in the case of one, a former video game reporter, who talk about the news, video game news, or just, whatever video game related topic they feel like talking about. And one of the things they actually mentioned in the most recent episode, as of time of recording, was the different reasons that sometimes people will harass reviewers. Like, whether it is I really want a sequel, and so I want to make sure this game just gets 10 out of 10s across the board. Or nowadays there's an increasingly broad array of places where you can just bet on anything you want, including
God.
what the average like Metacritic score of a video game will be, or something like that. And so if you have money riding on it, maybe you will become more likely to harass a reviewer for giving an 8 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10. I don't know. Not to excuse that, but it was interesting hearing from some people who are familiar with the industry some various reasons why people harass reviewers.
Hmm.
I hadn't thought about the gambling. I go, God, everything's got gambling associates. Like every time you try to like watch television in their commercials, it's like DraftKings and BetMGM and all those things. Like I put on Tubi and like every ad is gambling. And you mind like when I go on Reddit, I keep seeing ads for bet on who will win the 2028 presidency is one I keep
Mm.
seeing now, which on the one hand is like gross because like it's just infiltrating gambling everywhere into our lives. On the other hand, it is also pretty ambitious to think that we're going to have an election in 2028, but that's a whole nother thing. But that's interesting about like, yeah, people holding all sorts of different incentives to do these. And there's just like if you go on any IGN review, and particularly IGN, you'll just see guys, like I said, you'll see people in the comments section who just all they do is dump on IGN. And whatever review IGN gives, it's not good enough for them, whatever it is. And I mean, I guess on the one hand, it's like, it's kind of sad on that one part, but also I imagine IGN appreciates the engagement on their YouTube, but it all pays the same, in
Yeah.
YouTube's eyes. But yeah, so fairly positively received game in general, like when we talked about Stellar Blade last time. Generally, people think this is a pretty good game. Again, I have no opinion on it because I tried to play it and I had the wrong system for it because I did not pay attention. As the name suggests, the game is set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. So I turned to the group and just asked you, what do you all know about Warhammer 40K?
I have not personally engaged with it. I'm vaguely familiar with it as a game. My understanding is that there's some relation to Event Horizon with this. Like the Event Horizon is kind of like one of the levels of Warhammer, and there's miniatures involved that are very expensive. That's all I know.
Yeah, I am familiar with, or I have a vague understanding that I think when you play the tabletop game of Warhammer 40K, you get a certain amount of more or less points depending on whether or not you have painted your miniatures. So I'm very happy for people who really like painting hundreds of miniatures. I like doing it occasionally, but not that much. And like I said, I think I remember from that Secret Levels episode that yeah, it seemed like there's these space marines are like indoctrinated holy warriors. But yeah, that's about all I know about the lore.
Yeah, I will preface this by saying that I'm absolutely no expert in Warhammer. My exposure is mostly doing the research on this and the fact that our nephew got into miniatures not too long ago. He likes painting figures. And
Not
part of
Warhammer
that,
ones, though.
yeah, part of that, well, part of what got him into that was he went to a miniatures painting session with his dad at a local game shop and they had a couple of 40K figures. So he came home with, I think, two Space Marines painted. He's more into the fantasy ones and the sci-fi ones. And when we do our D&D sessions, we have a bunch of miniatures and we've been giving him them to paint them and paying him a couple bucks to do it. But part
Cool.
of his in for that was he doesn't care about the lore at all for 40K, but he thought the figure was fun to paint. So for the uninitiated, Warhammer 40,000, also called Warhammer 40K, is a miniatures-based tabletop war game developed by Rick Priestley and released in 1987 by Nottingham, UK-based Games Workshop, originally under the name Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. It is a sci-fi themed spin-off of the fantasy-based Warhammer Fantasy Battles, set in the grim darkness of the future where there is only war. Warhammer 40K's world, you mentioned Event Horizon, Kate, but what's really interesting about 40K in general as a brand is that it's a goulash of sci-fi and high and low fantasy concepts mashed together into a single package. So with Priestley clearly drawing inspiration from a bevy of sources, including The Lord of the Rings, Dune, Aliens, H.P. Lovecraft, and contemporary British dystopian works like 2000 AD. And it blends the likes of orcs and elves with superpowered psychics, dudes in power armor, and interstellar space travel through dimensions full of eldritch horrors. It quickly became a massive success and has been Games Workshop's flagship product ever since, going through numerous editions and inspiring a host of ancillary media, including board and video games, comics, and around 520 tie-in novels. There are lots of novels. From an outsider's perspective, I kind of knew it from the periphery. I've never been a miniatures guy. I've always obviously been more of a video game than a tabletop, although I like D&D. But I think what's really interesting, learning more about 40K and its fandom, is like I can see the appeal in that it allows fans to engage with it in a lot of different ways. And like there are people who play the actual tabletop war game. There are some people, though, who just like building and painting the miniatures, and that's their whole part of it, and don't play the game. They do the miniatures, putting together armies, reading the tie-in media, like the novels, playing the video games, or just consuming its extremely complex, ponderous lore. And some people just engage with it by watching, for example, lore videos about 40K. There's also kind of enough diversity among the game's various factions that there really is something for everyone in Warhammer fandom.
It's just sounding more and more like Five Nights at Freddy's the more you describe it. Especially the whole just pondering the lore instead of actually engaging with the game necessarily, right? And the many, many novels and something for I don't know, whatever.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. That's a great comparison because, yeah, the way people engage with Five Nights at Freddy's is you have the people who play the video games, you have people who watch Let's Players play the video games, like a lot of what got that game popular were people like PewDiePie and Markiplier doing Let's Plays. Then there's, Scott Cawthon's extremely complicated lore, which is played out through the games as well as, a series of tie-in novels. There's the films now. There's all the merch that is connected with Five Nights at Freddy's. I think that's a pretty apt comparison there. In terms of the way 40K works as a brand is very similar to that. And then there is the power armor-clad elephant in the room. The Imperium of Man. What, if anything, do you know about the Imperium?
They're Nazis.
Yeah, I don't know. The sense I got from the Secret Levels episode was that they're, if I'm not mixing things up, they're like all like indoctrinated warrior dudes. But yeah, I did get a sense that they were some sort of totalitarian regime.
Yeah, as Kate mentioned, they're basically skipping ahead. They're basically like space Nazis. They're
and I guess more accurately from my initial, they themselves are just like cuddlebugs for Nazis in that regard. Like Nazis who are fans of Warhammer are always specifically going to be members of the Imperium because that's my favorite. Right,
yeah.
Kev?
Yeah, hold on to that. We're going to talk about that in more detail in a minute. But yeah, basically. So let's talk about the Imperium first. The Imperium, they're a faction in Warhammer 40,000. The Imperium is a human ethno-nationalist state bent on ideological and racial purity and endless war across the galaxy, where its people are largely seen as expendable fuel in an ever-running imperialist murder machine. Managed by a ponderously massive bureaucracy, its figurehead is the Emperor, a powerful millennia-old telepath who remains in a comatose state atop a golden throne, kept alive, according to the 1987 Rogue Trader rulebook, quote, by means of ancient technology and sheer effort of will, end quote.
Cheeseburgers.
Yeah, dude, cheeseburgers. There's so much McDonald's. There's a comparison to be made there.
What are you talking about?
Having ruled for over 10,000 years, the Emperor acts as a messianic strongman who is worshipped as a god by his millions of zealous followers and whose vast psychic powers make interstellar travel possible. He's basically just a living corpse on top of a throne, acting as like, is he actually alive or is he just like this dead beacon? I'm not going to get into that because I don't know anything about Warhammer's lore. That's kind of where the Emperor fits into the Imperium, as this kind of like symbolic figure. The Emperor's will is carried out by a massive army whose vanguard is the Legionis Astartes, better known as the Space Marines, a warrior class of genetically engineered super soldiers clad in imposing power armor. A comparative example, if people want to think from video games aside from the 40K ones, of course, are things like StarCraft. If you've played as the Terrans are very much a relatively comparable analog in terms of their appearance, not necessarily their politics. But if you think about like big guys, big mechanical power armor, holding weapons and stuff, very kind of similar thing. But yeah, that's the space.
Yeah, I feel like, isn't it also vaguely visually reminiscent of like those dudes in power armor from the Fallout games as well? Or maybe I'm power armor racist in that all giant suits of power armor look the same to me.
You just see every power armor like that. Yeah, I would imagine that the Brotherhood of Steel is a little bit of, I would say probably a little bit. They may be, again, from a very ancillary observation, might be more inspired by the Space Marines than the other way around, is because Fallout came out after Warhammer. So it's very possible that they might have been a manner of inspiration.
When did this come out in relation to Starship Troopers, the novel specifically?
That's a good question. Look at so I believe that the Heinlein novel predates them. Warhammer comes out in 1987. I'll look up real fast when Starship Troopers comes out. The Heinlein novel of Starship Troopers came out in 1959. So yeah,
Plenty
I
of
would
time.
say that was kind of the granddaddy of these kinds of things.
Right. And the movie obviously came out after Warhammer.
Yeah, the movie came out in 1997.
Right. All right.
So all these things are barring, and you could also put in aliens of this too on a certain level. But yeah, this kind of idea of like big imposing military dudes in giant mechanical armor who fight monsters, basically. In this case, they are shock troopers in this ethno-national state that is the Imperium. And as you mentioned before, Andy, would-be space marines are conscripted at a young age, and through years of cybernetic, genetic, and psychological manipulation, are transformed into hulking living weapons who live and die solely in service of the Emperor. So yeah, as we pointed out with the Imperium, they're basically space Nazis. When it comes down to it, the Imperium, they are hyper-exaggerated caricatures of authoritarianism and fascism, complete with all the bombastic trappings of an empire driven by propaganda and conformity in brutal service of a strongman whose will is enacted by brainwashed thugs. Like so much of the iconography of the Imperium and the Space Marines is very much inspired by fascist states, like the Nazis in particular. And not for nothing, Warhammer 40,000 was developed during the height of Thatcherite England, and the Games Workshop has gone to great lengths to emphasize that the Imperium is meant to be satirical. However, the Space Marines play a complicated role in Warhammer 40,000 as a brand. On the one hand, they're clearly shock troopers for a blatantly authoritarian fascist ethno-state hell-bent on ideological and racial purity. On the other hand, they're also 40K's most popular property. And the Space Marines are front and center in Games Workshop's marketing, hence the Space Marine video games. If anyone took any one thing from an aesthetic standpoint about 40K, it's the Space Marines. They are front and center. They are the centerpiece of this entire brand. They are the most popular faction in 40,000. They are, in terms of the iconography, they lean really heavily in terms of their branding on the Space Marine and the Imperium. So yeah, they have this complicated role depicted as these hyper-exaggerated caricatures of fascism and authoritarianism, but they're also the big moneymaker for Games Workshop. As a result, critics have observed that over the years, the company has carefully smoothed down the Imperium's extremist edges, reframing the Space Marines from dangerous idiots engaged in endless genocidal war in the name of an undead figurehead into noble warriors protecting humanity from the twin threats of the alien Xenos and the powers of chaos, all of which undermines Game Workshop's own professed message that the Space Marines are designed to be exaggerated caricatures of fascism.
I actually appreciate that about the intention behind these things. It's like, you're going to hold up a mirror to history and use that in this war game. It is interesting, I guess is not the right word, but it's the only one that comes to mind about how it can backfire. It's like the only thing I can think of, and again, this isn't a perfect analogy, but sort of the way that people will, watch American Psycho wrong and end up thinking that Patrick Bateman's violent and misogynistic attitudes and antisocial personality and habits are cool and things you want to emulate. And when in fact it's like, it's a satire of that. Not a satire, but like, no, you don't want to be like this. This is antithetical to who you should want to be as a person, to what you should aspire to be. And his actions are ultimately ridiculous and show themselves to be ridiculous. But people just fall in love with the wrong message or are just already there. I don't know.
Well, that's part of it, but I think also because they are so big part of the brand and people are like buying in droves the Space Marine figures and consuming novels which are primarily focused around the Imperium and the Space Marines, it's like you still need characters you can relate to, and so there's an incentive there for the Games Workshop to see, these space Nazis, they're not that bad. They're not that big in Nazis. It's a scale, where they have to be like cool and heroic so that they can
They're trying to loop in more of these problematic people intentionally with the characters.
One of the biggest criticisms right now about the Games Workshop and 40K as a brand is the fact that on the one hand, the Imperium are considered, these hyper exaggerated figures, but also on the other hand, they also depict them in their marketing as pretty cool. As like cool, heroic people who fight off all of these space monsters and things like that. And so there's this contradictory message, this dissonance between what is Games Workshop trying to say about the Space Marines,
I wonder, was this because I can certainly imagine that when 40K originally came out, what they were trying to do could have been to say that, like, this is a dystopian far future that no faction in the game is actually like entirely good. That, and so it could have been that, yeah, these are whoever you pick to be your faction is going to be somehow, problematic deliberately because, yeah, as like you said, as like a satire. But yeah, but then like the popularity of this got away from them, or as they expanded, the lore and like, well, now that we're writing novels, we need to have some kind of like sympathetic POV characters in there and stuff. That, yeah, it just created this problem of like, well, the bedrock and the house we build upon it are kind of mismatched.
Yeah, when they are your main part of the brand, they are, for lack of a better term, the heroes, even in, and I think you're right, a lot of my understanding, again, not a 40K of expert by any means, kind of the ideas of like the whole world is kind of terrible and all of the factions have these issues. They call it a grim dark future. The branding of 40K is grim dark. Everyone's bad and terrible and awful in their own ways, but they also kind of need the Space Marines to be like super cool.
So it sounds like they are aware of this as a problem, but are also aware that these Space Marines are their hottest property. And so for a long time they've been leaning into that. Like if you told me there were any other characters or anything, any other sorts of characters in Warhammer, I don't know about them. And I guess the intention seems like it's well offset by original intention seems like it's well offset at this point by the fact that they're leaning into like, I don't care who's buying them. Let's just keep making them and make more of them and make novels about them and make them cool heroes that you want to, that you want to play as. I'm thinking about where there was intention and then when the negative impact started to happen, they sort of taper off. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but like the novella Rage by Stephen King was linked to a number of high schoolers who were violent and at risk for school shootings, and he ultimately allowed that to go out of print on purpose because he just figured it was doing too much harm. And likewise, why you can't buy red laces on the Doc Martin website. Can you go out and buy red bootlaces somewhere? Of course, but they're not going to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Kate, where it's that, yeah, on the one hand they are supposed to be these problematic figures, but on the other hand they're also the thing that people are buying, you know?
You're playing it wrong, but you're buying them, so fine, go.
Yeah. And there have been a number of pieces that have talked about this contrast with the Imperium. I was trying to show an example of, so I'm going to share my screen really briefly just so you can get a sense of like how this. All right, so just sharing my screen briefly here. These are a couple of images from the original 40K Rogue Trader rulebook from 1987. So you can see here, this is an introduction to the Imperium. We can see on the left-hand side here, if people want to follow along at home, this is on page 129 of the Rogue Trader rulebook, which I'll put in the notes. And as we can see here, an image of the Imperium, which shows the Space Marines in a very overtly fascist imagery. We see an army of them from behind as they stand in front of a imposing walled city with a large Barad-dûr type spire with a big skull on it, and below that is like a spread eagle symbol that is very reminiscent of things that the Nazis used. And so we see this iconography and a lot of the images are these over exaggerated brick shithouse type characters. I'm trying to find another image of a Space Marine so you can see. A lot of the artwork is very cool. It's very Giger inspired, I think. So like here on the left-hand side, I'm on page 149, we see some images of Space Marines with some like mechanical equipment here, and you can see they're kind of like these like big, like hulking figures here. Here's another one here from page 152. Again, we see this guy here he's got a skull and crossbones on his shoulder, and he's got like this, his face is like all maimed on the one side with a cybernetic eye. And by contrast, I want to show you the current edition of the Warhammer 40K website. And you can see images here of the Space Marines. So there's one in the banner of one of them fighting, this is called the Xenos, those alien bug race things that they fight in Space Marine 2.
What is that thing over the Space Marine's head?
I do not know enough about Warhammer to comment. It's like this big, like rounded skull with spikes around it.
It looks almost like a halo or like religious imagery. And I was just wondering if it had anything to do with the guy you mentioned who may or may not be dead. And it was
Oh, the Emperor. It could
yeah.
be. Again, I don't know enough about 40K lore to say. And so like you can skim down and see, like we've got here this image of the Warhammer 40,000 combat patrols, and we've got the Space Marine in the middle here. A lot of the backgrounds of the images with the Space Marine look a lot more heroic than they do in the original books. So, like, here's an image of the cover of the core rule book, which shows like a couple Space Marines standing triumphantly over it looks like a pile of other Space Marines. So all that's to say that Games Workshop is in kind of this weird position now when it comes to presenting the Imperium. So, like I said, they've kind of smoothed down the edges of them over the years. For example, in his detailed takedown of the contradictory messaging of the Space Marine, Tim Colwell, in a really fascinating article, which I'll include in the notes, took Games Workshop to task for watering down any overt political messaging in Warhammer 40,000 over the years in favor of a safe, marketable approach that largely uses, for example, progressive ideas as a milquetoast selling point. Part of what Cole described as, quote, the company's increasingly conservative and corporate attitude to their own product, saying, quote, the only ideological positions which are allowed in the world of Warhammer 40,000 are those which pose no challenge to the narrative power structure or to the product release roadmap. A black space marine here, a powerful female hero there, or if we're really lucky, a minor background character who uses they, them pronouns. Genuinely satirical or thought-provoking ideology which cannot be readily incorporated into the established system is either watered down to the point of meaninglessness or rejected outright. Readers of Warhammer 40,000's lore are allowed to learn that war is bad as long as they also learn that it is necessary, that the Imperium is deeply corrupt and evil, but that there's simply no better or more viable alternative, and that even seemingly advanced, friendly alien races are actually not quite as shiny and nice as some might think, which makes it okay to engage in a bit of cheeky genocide, end quote.
Yeah. Any fandom, obviously, once you release it, fans will make it their own and potentially assign different meanings to it than you, the
Sure.
creator, have. But especially in the case of a tabletop role-playing game, like the whole point of that is for the players to create their own stories about it, you know?
But Andy, if you were playing a tabletop game with somebody who was like, my story that I'm going to make is I'm going to make these thinly veiled Nazi metaphors, I imagine you'd be pretty uncomfortable and you wouldn't want to play with those people. And I imagine that could cause some harm, right? To the
Well,
people
yeah,
around.
well, so it'd be one thing if everybody at the table was like, "Oh, all right, yeah, your character comes from like the Nazi analog, and my character comes from like if we're all agreeing to play exaggerated bad people or from history or something, you know." But yeah, the tricky thing becomes, yeah, that tension between like there's only so many miniatures and so many shirts and bobbleheads and whatever you can sell satirically.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think for me, it's if, and this could be said of any character in any tabletop game, if someone's playing as, and albeit framed as satirical version of an evil, analog to a real evil in history, and you're a little too into this, you know what I mean? Like, wow, you're really leaning into the violent, hateful behavior in the character, or you're busting out some racial slurs, or like that sort of thing. And it sounds from Kevin, from what you're describing, that's kind of what we're dealing with in terms of a large contingent of fans of the Imperium at this point. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's kind of what this is leading to. So that brings us to our next paragraph, which I think is apt for this discussion, which is on top of Game Workshop's conflicting messaging regarding the Space Marines, another problem that you have both pointed out arises when you attempt to create a mockery of fascism that adopts fascism's pompous, bombastic trappings. There will always be a percentage of consumers who aren't in on the joke that Nazis are dumb losers and play it entirely straight, embracing these caricatures as sincere celebrations of the very ideology it is ostensibly mocking. And for analogs of this, I think of like other media that parodies authoritarianism. I think of like Helldivers as an example of this, or Starship Troopers, in that, as with the Imperium, there's always an issue where when you present Nazis in your work, even when it's ironic, there's always a chance that presentation will be unironically appealing to Nazis.
Yeah, and this I think goes into it immediately reminded me of that criticism of even most anti-war movies have a really hard time making war not look cool and exciting. And so yeah, like so if you're showing fascists being in a war as the characters you're following in a war, you inherently have a harder time making it look like their adventures are not cool and exciting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the thing that you have when you have in this case with Warhammer, a brand that involves that kind of iconography. Even if you're making fun of it, they're going to be people like, that's super cool. And I like all of that stuff. And I like not just the imagery and stuff. It's like this is making them feel like powerful super badasses. And I want to be a powerful super badass, of course. But they also believe in, they've also applied the political ideology of things like fascism and Nazism to that. And they assume that it's going to appeal to people who are fascist, who believe in fascism. And with all that in mind, it won't shock you to learn that critics have observed that the Warhammer 40K community has something of a Nazi problem, with a subset of players who connect a little too much with the Ubermenches who also happen to be the face of the franchise. For example, in November of 2021, at a large 40K tournament held in Spain, one Imperium competitor came dressed in Nazi iconography and played using figures decorated in swastikas under the handle The Austrian Painter.
Now, I see why this would be a hard thing maybe to implement at the sort of convention that people are paying to attend. But I feel like you got to have the same rules that bartenders have, that if you have a bar and you let one Nazi, drink there, before you know it, you have a Nazi bar. So you got to get them out of the very first sign.
Yeah. This person prompted Games Workshop, the makers of 40K, to put out a statement on November 19th, 2021, where the company explained the Imperium were not designed to be aspirational, writing, quote, "The Imperium of Man stands as a cautionary tale of what could happen should the very worst of humanity's lust for power and extreme unyielding xenophobia set in. Like so many aspects of Warhammer 40,000, the Imperium of Man is satirical," end quote. And all of this paints Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2, going back to the Real Game Awards, all of this kind of points its inclusion at the Real Game Awards in so many categories in a slightly more sinister light than an alleged celebration of games by quote-unquote real gamers. And speaking of which, you can also see this problem of people getting into 40K specifically for the fascism on display at the Real Game Awards, because presenting the award for biggest industry failure was a YouTuber by the name of Arch Warhammer, or simply Arch. And has anyone heard of this guy?
No.
No.
You remember how a few minutes ago I said that one of the things that I found interesting about Warhammer 40K as an outsider is that its broad world offers something for everyone, both in terms of the factions and the ways you can engage with, like the miniatures in the game and the novels and all that stuff, that it's kind of something for everybody. That's not how Arch sees it. Arch doesn't ascribe to this idea, believing instead that 40K is and can only be appealing to one demographic: guys like Arch Warhammer. And that raises the question of who the hell this Richard Spencer looking motherfucker is. He does look like Richard Spencer. Arch is notable in the Warhammer 40K community for two things: posting detailed 40K lore videos and being a really, really big fan of the Imperium, if you know what I mean. For example, in a September 22nd, 2024 Twitter post, he commented, and again, this is before the Real Game Awards aired. So in September 2024, he posted, quote, "Warhammer is innately masculine, and furthermore, it is inherently right-wing. There is nothing progressive about 40K. It is, in fact, the antithesis of progressivism, and thus, indeed, too manly for gay communists," end quote.
Well, that's interesting because I could easily imagine the start of that spiel being part of an earnest criticism trying to grapple with the tensions in Warhammer itself. Is like, so here's the thing, any tabletop strategy game where your only options are to fight and kill one another in combat is inherently, like, I can imagine an actual like earnest analysis and critique it that way. But then it was funny, like, then it's a real right turn to like, no, it is right wing, and that's a good thing, and we should embrace it wholeheartedly. And if you try to
There's not enough right wing things in this world. We need more of them.
yeah, if you try to espouse any other value in your life, then Warhammer is not for you, and you do not belong here, snowflake.
Yeah, he does like calling people gay communists. It's just kind of a thing he says. Like what he would call a social justice warrior, he would call that. So yeah, and it also points to a belief that I think some people have, where there's a certain inclination, and this guy seems to have that, where it's like, if it's something that I enjoy, if I like it a lot, then clearly it reflects all of my values. I can project all of my values onto it. So if this right wing, fascist leaning guy likes Warhammer because of the iconography, it must be the Warhammer is also fascist. That's what he likes about it must be what he's projecting onto it. And there's plenty of I can speak for myself. There's plenty of media that doesn't align with me politically that I find interesting or engaging. There are things you can pull from media that doesn't necessarily politically agree with you, but this guy he kind of needs the thing he likes to be what he is. So yeah, if that wasn't all troubling, he also has a real problem, as something we've talked about in the past with Kershaw. He has a problem with posting outright fascist and racist shit going well back before Stuttering Craig gave him a platform on his paid award show. For example, on October 15th, 2019, he was kicked out of the 40K lore subreddit for promoting hate speech. A year later, folks leaked posts from Arch's Discord of him saying some really just vile, racist, and pro-Nazi shit, including saying of Romani people, quote, "In the 20s to 40s, we were so close to solving the problem," end quote. This is the type of person this is. So yeah, not a cool guy, I would argue. His neo-Nazi leanings also appear to be a known issue in the 40K community. For example, in researching this episode, I started listening to Warhammer 40K lore videos by a YouTuber named Arbiter Ian, who is actually pretty cool. His videos are very accessible, they're very interesting, and they make the lore really interesting. And I noticed in one of his videos, watching them, apropos of nothing, several commenters just called Arch a fascist. Like, it wasn't even about that. It just devolved into Arch as a fascist. This that, of course, inspired a would-be defender of Arch and similar, let's say, Imperium leading content creators in the 40K community to vehemently argue that just because somebody likes using slurs doesn't mean they're racist. So that's cool and okay. How are we all doing right now?
Man, I kind of wish we had a get over here game to take a break from some of this. But whatever. We'll manage.
I promise we're almost through this, and it kind of ends on a funnier note. I thought about this script in a lot of different ways over the last few months, and initially I was just going to do a rundown of all these people, and it's like it was like psychic damage. Every one of these people I looked up because they're all like this. I picked only a few of them to talk about, but they're all like this.
I wonder how grifters like this when they work with each other. Like, do they all feel like? Do they bond over like, yeah, we're grifting the rubes, or do they feel like, I've all these other chumps are lesser than me. I'm the one who's really making out, or
Yeah, who knows? And I keep going back and forth in my mind. Again, it kind of doesn't matter whether or not they really believe in it. And I think I think of like guys like Smash JT, like he is shaped by the algorithm. He kept putting out stuff to try to get something that would go viral, and eventually jumping on to like harassing listener content became it. And the thing about the algorithm is like you need to, especially when it comes to like these, like particularly like if it's politically leaning stuff, if it's shocking and inflammatory, you need to keep upping yourself because your audience is going to be increasingly radicalized the more stuff you have. And like you get in that trap where like if you don't keep more radicalizing yourself, you'll lose the audience and they'll find somewhere else to go. Again, it's like the InfoWars kind of pipeline where like Alex Jones says all these, horrible things. And then eventually people like it's not enough for them. So like you need to go to like the Nick Fuentes who are like, out and out like, fascists and Nazis. Like it's almost like you're chasing a high and you have to keep drumming stuff up to keep them there. It's a testament to like the precariousness of content creation as a line of work. But it's also like, it's also the way that people can radicalize themselves too.
It makes me wonder what I would do if I had created a story or some piece of media that I thought was obviously being critical of, fascism or whatever, and then a bunch of people latched onto it and really liked it. It's like I would, if it were just me, yeah, and it's not something owned by a larger corporation, I would hope I'd have the integrity to be like, all right, never mind. I am not selling this thing anymore because I don't want that. I don't want the dirty money or whatever. But who knows?
Yeah. The well gets poisoned to a certain extent. And it is that thing where like if a thing gets big enough, then like it kind of has to have the edges filed down because it has to appeal to everybody. So yeah, I'll end this grim dark section by saying that Arch is also not well liked in the Total War community either. Anybody familiar with Total War, the Total War games?
No.
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 So they're a long-running series of historically themed real-time strategy games. They go back a long time. They're PC games. And in July of 2019, then Total War community manager Michael Wheels Whelan signed off his final live stream before quitting the company, saying, "quote Arch Warhammer's a dickhead. Goodbye." End quote. So with all that, we're going to get away from the 40K stuff for the rest of this part. So with that, let's pivot back to the Real Game Awards and take a few minutes to look at I'm going to try to make it a little bit more light thing. I know that was kind of heavy stuff. We're going to pivot instead to look at what was the reception, what was the impact of this, real award show for the real gamers slash, Stuttering Craig's business venture. And so again, what did people think about this? So for one, some developers whose games received attention at the awards did not appreciate their association with it. Because here's the thing. During the award show, they featured trailers for a bunch of indie games throughout it and did not get permission to do so. They did not ask the indie creators if they wanted to be affiliated with this. They just did it. They just put out these trailer videos. It's like, listen, check out this cool game we really like. And did not ask them if that was okay. And Craig noted this in the actual award show, saying that they did not reach out to these creators and did it without their consent because that was, in his word, quote, part of the fun, end quote. He thought that was by design.
So I think that just really shows how unofficial and not real this real game awards is, because like at the Keighley Game Awards, the trailers they show are the trailers that game companies have paid to have at the awards. Whereas the only people willing to pay to have any affiliation with the real game awards are, charitably, I guess we'll call them like civilians, people who aren't involved in the industry at all. But it's just how interesting that he can only get chumps on the internet to give him money and not actual people who have marketing budgets to share their games.
Any thoughts, Kate?
No. Just that chumps on the internet has on a lot of levels. I'm not just talking about this specifically. I'm observing a few things online in certain corners of the internet. I think I glanced on last time that just show that chumps on the internet and their money are always soon parted.
Yeah. It's a very fool and his money kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. They just, and like, they're just doing it for themselves. And like, it's like if we just like, we did one of these things. Okay, I don't know, if I just like stop the episode and here's just an episode of The Simpsons in the middle of it, just because I think it's fun. I'd ask for permission to do that. I just did it because I wanted to do that. And, it's up to, 20th Century Fox, or is Disney, Fox, who owns Fox, to decide whether or not they're going to let me do that.
Like some people see like a random TikTok live where, somebody has their phone pointed at their TV and we're just watching episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog or something. I like.
And I guess in that one, you could theoretically send them money, but the whole foundation of this was a transaction. All of this was money, all of this was filtering money to Stuttering Craig. And yeah, so they feature a couple of different indie games throughout the show where they, did not ask them for that. They just did it. And one of those was a game called Silico. I actually don't know how to probably pronounce this, so apologies if I mispronounce it. Silico. It's a retro-inspired sci-fi themed first-person shooter that was developed by Altered Orbit Studios, and Craig showed a trailer of this game. And on January 24th, 2025, the lead developer of Silico, who goes by the name Nexxtic, Nexxtic, posted on Blue Sky that the Real Game Awards featured their game without their permission and disavowed any affiliation with the awards show, writing, quote, "The more I'm looking into this, the more I want to distance myself, LMAO," end quote.
You don't have to put this in the episode, Kevin, but this also reminds me of is the 420 Awards.
I was the same thing.
Among other things, so it's this deeply amateur. Andy, are you familiar with the 420 Awards?
No, I'm guessing it's got something to do with marijuana.
Yeah, just a little. Yeah, and it's nonsense, and it's mostly meant as I think just a bunch of comedy sketches, honestly, by amateurs with cameras. But one of the categories they have every year is best movie, and it's not like a movie not necessarily a movie that came out this year. Like the nominees, some of them are movies that came out this year, but some of them are movies that came out like 10 years ago or more, right, Kevin? Like, so it'll just be like, I like this movie. I recently rewatched Heat, and that was good. So that's that kind of station.
Yeah, it's an award show created by this guy named Derek Savage, who's kind of like this weird eccentric who will put on the internet. He streams them most years. He claims he wants it to be like the fourth best award show. And it's literally just a rundown of him nominating and giving awards to things he likes. And there's
Okay.
somehow and then in between that are weird like sketch comedy and just talking about weed and whatever other thing is in his head. If you want a fun way of watching it, there's a YouTuber called Adam and Pals. I don't know if you're familiar with him. His channel is Your Movie Sucks or YMS. And him and his friends every year will do running commentary of the 420 awards, which is very funny. It's fun to watch. And yeah, what he does is like he'll just pick random movies. It's like, best movie ever, hottest babe. And he'll just pick nominees. They'll be like, copyright protected clips. He'll run through them and then he'll just give awards and he'll just hand them to some random person claiming that they're going to give them to whoever it is. So like, Scarlett Johansson getting like hottest babe or something and just handing it to the stagehand or something. It's very fascinating. And I will say this to Derek Savage's credit, unlike Stuttering Craig, he doesn't charge anybody a nickel for that. He does that for the love of the game. So this is how Nextstick sees this. It's like, I don't want anything to do with this thing. Nextstick is the lead developer. And in response, some of these free speech advocates, those people who really, really hate censorship, rush to complain that Altered Orbit should be lucky for all of the free exposure the Real Game Awards imposed upon them. And several felt the small indie studio needed to be punished for their lack of gratitude.
Oh man, wait. Who is it? JD Vance leading this online mob? You need to be grateful. Why aren't you grateful enough?
Why did you dress up for this award show?
Keep him away from that couch.
It's funny you mention that because like they got their version of JD Vance for this. Our old buddy Mark Kern. Following the post, Mark Kern, aka Grums, and if you want more about Grums, check out our previous episode, posted to his thousands of followers on X, quote, Sulaco didn't just cave to the bullying cancel culture, they embraced it and have picked a side. Vote accordingly, end quote. And to the surprise of no one, over the next several days, the Real Game Awards supporters bum-rushed Sulaco's online spaces, including their Steam community, and staged a review bombing campaign where they explain how Altered Orbit were just, mean meanies being mean to them. As one user complained in a one-star Google review. And I've been doing a lot of the talking, so I want to get you the chance to read some fun stuff. So I'm going to put this in the chat if someone wants to read this.
Andy, go for it.
Okay.
And make sure you read it as it is written out.
Don't support the dev. They attacked people for being promoted by Real Game Awards, a show that lets gamers, with an apostrophe, have voting power in what Real Game of the Year is, as Game Awards is corporation driven now. Instead of taking a big recommendation for their game and spoken very positively about, the dev lashes out at them as well as people who liked Real Game Awards.
I thought that was one of the funnier ones that was on there. And if you go onto the Steam page, Valve was clearly ready for this because if you go to the Steam reviews, they marked a particular stretch of time right after about a week out from the Real Game Awards as an aberration in their ratings. And some of them, not all of them, clearly wasn't a big bum rush, but they kind of marked it like this is when they're probably going to review bomb. And one or two of them are basically, they were mean to the Real Game Awards and we need to, punish them for that. And in response, Altered Orbit, the makers of Sulaco, actually walked back Nextstick's statements, putting out a post on their Steam community board explaining, quote, in retrospect, we would have simply insisted that our inclusion was not a paid spot and that we were unaware of the show altogether. The official Sulaco account is not the place to be sharing personal opinions, end quote. So I guess the moral of the story is that bullying works. For a contrast to that, though, I'm going to point you to another one of the indie games that was featured there. Another indie dev whose game received attention at the Real Game Awards, another game that received attention was Nightmare Kart, which won Best Racing Game. Is anyone familiar with Nightmare Kart?
No.
No.
This one's actually really cool. So Nightmare Kart is, do any of you remember a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk online that someone was making a PS1 inspired remake of Bloodborne?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, so the person who made Nightmare Kart. Nightmare Kart was originally developed as a PS1 graphic style kart game, like a Mario Kart type game with Bloodborne characters in it. And it's developed by LW Media, who's run by Lilith Walker, aka Botster. I think it's like a 1 or 2 person team. Got a lot of attention a couple years ago for the Bloodborne remake, was making this Bloodborne cart game, which was originally called Bloodborne Cart, and then FromSoft sent a cease, or FromSoft, or I think the company above them, I think Bandai sent a cease and desist. But they didn't shut down the game, so basically LW Media just rebranded it. They took out all the Bloodborne branding but kept the aesthetic and everything, and now it's called Nightmare Cart. So it receives the award for Best Racing Game. But a fun, crucial fact that was missed by the anti-woke dudes paying Stuttering Craig to nominate games. Because, they nominated this game. They voted for this game. Fun fact about Lilith Walker, the person who developed this game. Lilith Walker is a trans woman. Because as we've covered, media literacy is not one of these dudes' strong suits.
Wait, so yeah, so then did that company react at all? Or did they accept it and be like, hey, idiots, fuck you Nazis, or did they disavow it or what?
I'm glad you asked, because when Lilith Walker found out about this, she wrote an acceptance speech.
Oh, cool.
So Walker posted an acceptance speech on X on January the 25th, 2025 that read the following. I don't know if you want to read this one, Kate.
Sure. So honored to have won the coveted Anti-Woke Game Awards Best Racing Game category. As a trans woman, it's so comforting to see them prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. To celebrate, I'm going to go have gay sex with my gay slur transgender dog girl.
I just thought that was funny. So yeah, that's the response for some of the people who got roped into this without their consent, I would say. Then that raises the question, what about the larger gaming space? And so how did Stuttering Craig's cavalcade of misfits, malcontents, and out-and-out racists fare online in general? And based on my research, it made little impact outside of their own circles and, masochistic freaks like me. As of this recording, the live stream has been viewed around 73,000 times. However, those numbers might be skewed as it was taken down for a time due to some copyrighted music in the intro, which forced Craig to re-upload the video of the stream without the music, and unintentionally giving the opening animation sequence an uncanny quality as their animated takedown of the Game Awards, complete with, and this is real, a racist caricature of Hideo Kojima, plays out with sound effects but no music. It's not great.
It's like that preview for that Tom Cruise Mummy movie where they circulated a preview that had no sound, no background sound, no bed music.
Oh no.
It's really weird.
That's weird. So going back to the impact of the real Game Awards. So as of this recording, the live stream has been viewed around 73,000 times. Overall, most of what I've seen on the awards online is either supporters or folks affiliated with patting themselves on the back for how much they own the libs, or people commenting how sketchy it sounded for the award so supposedly by gamers for gamers to require people to pay Stuttering Craig for the privilege of engaging in what appeared by all outward appearances to be a glorified Twitter poll. And if you want the duality of these kinds of thoughts, check out the comment section of the Real Game Awards, because you see both sides of that play through it. But beyond that, it was barely a blip on the social media radar. Searching X, the hashtag #TakeGamesBack was pretty much dead by late December 2024. You recall that's how this whole initiative started, was Stuttering Craig called it Take Games Back before he called it the Real Game Awards. And it basically had no impact online. And the Real Game Awards hashtag saw little use after March of 2025. So you saw a bunch leading up to the award show in January. You saw a bunch while the award show's happening, a little bit right after it happens. And then after that, it just went dark. There was nothing. It was pretty much dead after March of 2025. And moreover, searching YouTube videos with the most views regarding the awards, there's the live stream, a spattering of mentions from larger right-wing YouTubers prior to the show, and a few videos commenting on the backlashes to Sulaco and Nightmare Cart that we covered, but that's kind of it. It kind of had no impact. It's also worth mentioning there was also plenty of dunking on Craig's money-making scheme. For example, I came across a Twitter post that received over 1,000 likes describing the Real Game Awards as, quote, a $30,000 30-minute anti-woke Game Awards PowerPoint presentation, end quote. All of that leaves us with a burning question. Will we see a new Real Game Awards this year in 2026? Now, going along with the whole idea of the hashtag being dead after March of 2025, the Real Game Awards official social media was also pretty dead after January 2025, so after the award show. They made a membership plug on January the 30th and then posted nothing for 5 months. After which they posted on July the 1st the meme of CJ from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas saying, "Oh shit, here we go again." Under the post, quote, "Believe it or not, it's getting to be about that time," end quote. This post attracted very little hype, with a paltry 130 likes, 10 retweets, and 3 responses. One of those that caught my attention was posted the same day by a dude called Angry Guy. An angry guy looking over his stuff. He's a self-proclaimed crypto bro who basically just posts anti-woke talking points. So you'd think he'd be on board for another run of the show. However, when the Real Game Awards posted this, he cynically replied, quote, "This is basically just a notification that membership dues are coming up." So while I could be totally wrong by the time this episode goes live, I think we've heard the last of the Real Game Awards. Is what I would say if Stuttering Craig didn't post on September the 10th, 2025, announcing that they were going to give it another go on February the 23rd, 2026, at the Dave & Buster's in Dallas, Texas, with a promised live stream on YouTube and Rumble. So the way I've timed out this episode, it's going to come out right before the Real Game Awards is ostensibly going to happen.
Oh man. Wait, so then is our final segment our predictions for the Real Game Awards?
I have something a little better than that.
Okay.
All right, so the Real Game Awards is supposedly back. Stuttering Craig announced that they're going to give it another go on February the 23rd, 2026, which, based on my release cycle, will be 6 days after this drops. So this is the most current we've ever been.
And only 10 days after Valentine's Day. So
Yeah.
everybody wants to buy some tickets for their terrible, terrible significant other. If you're both terrible.
I love you so much. We're going to Dave & Buster's. Oh, why? No reason.
I just really wanted to do the Giant Fruit Ninja screen game.
Man, I'm thinking the logistics of this too. Like, Dave & Buster's is loud. I don't know if they have like, I know they have like party spaces and stuff, but it's got to be awful to record there, just thinking from a production standpoint.
I mean,
And
we've
like,
all been there where we're like at a loud restaurant and there's like somebody trying to like there's somebody trying to do announcements or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's a party where they're all trying to speak on the mic and give speeches or something and it's like too loud.
Craig just yelling at the crowd. You hear like all the sounds. Like, the award for best jiggle physics goes to what? Best wiggle physics? What's going on?
Your children scream crying in the background and somebody hits the jackpot and they're overwhelmed with the loud music.
Yeah, I like to think
The
of
Price is Right theme surges as somebody hits the jackpot, you know.
Yeah, I'd like to think of it like that episode of The Office with the Office. Was it the they do the Dundies or whatever, and when they do it at like a
Chili's.
Applebee's, yeah, they do it at the Chili's.
I feel God in this Chili's tonight. Come on.
Yeah,
Yeah. I was thinking more like the end of Inherit the Wind when
I was thinking it too. Get out of my
one
head.
guy's giving a speech and then he drops dead.
Yes, very good movie. Frederick March, awesome. Anyway, so beginning on December the 2nd, Craig revealed the categories for his next installment of the show. Returning categories included both Game of the Year and Shitty Ass Game of the Year, Best Multiplayer Game, and the coveted award for Best Jiggle Physics, while new additions included Best Community Mod, Best In-Game Moment, Best Content Creator, Best Game That Will Not Die, and perhaps the most revealing indication of Craig as a leftover relic of a long-gone gaming era, Best Xbox 360 Game Ever.
Honestly, that is like the closest there is, I think, to one of these categories that if I were running an award show would be there. Because I have started to think award shows should actually be done like 10 years at least after the fact, because then you're trying to see like, all right, which game or movie or whatever from this year actually stood the test of time
Yeah.
and made an impact and is something we talk about, because so like
Yeah.
so many like best picture winners from the Oscars are like, what?
Yeah.
Nobody's
Yeah,
heard of that movie now 30 years later.
Or like
Uh,
yeah, I did watch Chicago when it came out, but or something like that. And like, a movie might get panned at the, or do badly at the box office, but then, on streaming it gets a second life and a major following, or gets revisited 5 years down the line as like, wait, this was actually a really good movie. That's a great idea. Let's do it. Come on. The Scandies, they'll be that instead.
There you go. You remind me when we talked about a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the Razzies and how The Thing's score got a Razzie award.
Oh, there's so many brilliant movies that got nominated for Razzies.
So some things about this this announcement of the Real Game Awards, most of it is through their website, which you can check out like views and engagements. You can see views and comments.
Kevin, I'm sorry, I needed to check something, but I want to go back to the Razzie thing.
Sure.
The very first Golden Razzie Award, The Shining received 2 nominations: Worst Director for Stanley Kubrick and Worst Actress for Shelley Duvall.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
What a wrong opinion.
Yeah, and you mentioned the thing, and I'm pretty sure that it wasn't just the score. I'm pretty sure it got like a bunch. Hang on one second. Perhaps it was just the score. I could have swore it swept the Razzie nominations. I could be wrong. Anyway, please go on.
So yeah, going back to the idea of like the first one didn't really make that much of an impact. This also goes to the announcement of the next one because they would put out announcements on X that they were, and presumably Rumble, but I'm not checking there. No, 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 no.
That's where you draw the line for your internet footprint, is it?
Absolutely. They would put out announcements that, nominations are coming up, voting's coming up, and then they would direct people to their website, which the only way you can check the comments and things on it is if you subscribe, which I'm not going to do because I bet you have to pay Craig money to do that. They put posts out for each of the award nominations as well as the nominations themselves, and you can see a drop off in engagement pretty substantially. So, like, I'm on their website right now. I'll do one last screen share here. Yeah, so these are all the ones that they did leading up to the February 2026 iteration of it. You can see a number of views. One is 639 views, 51 comments when they first posted on December the 2nd. Then you can see views are about the same. Comments are starting to drop off. They do a bunch on the 3rd. A shitty ass game of the award gets 46 comments, 681 views, 18 likes. Then by the time we get to the next one, which is Best RPG, 177 views, 33 comments, and only 11 likes. So we're seeing a drop off as we go. And it continues like biggest letdown 165 views, 48 comments, 12 likes. Best shooting game, 105 views, 24 comments, 9 likes. It bumps up, unsurprisingly, for Best Jiggle Physics on December the 4th, 257 views, 27 comments, 10 likes. Best multiplayer game back down 92 views, 25 comments, 11 likes, and so on and so forth. It kind of never recovered from its initial high of about, 600 something. And most of them are all like, low 100 or less. With one exception, the voting one that he put on January the 3rd got 1,315 views and 32 likes, but no comments. He might have had comments turned off, maybe because he wants people to pay money to go and vote. But we can see that it's not really making that much of an impact. And so I thought a fun way to end things on was because I do not plan to watch this. I do not. I don't plan on doing a second installment of this. I think we've covered enough of this. I've certainly had a lot more exposure to this than I'd like. And I do not plan to subject myself to any more than that because life is too short. But I feel the responses to the awards return and the teaser announcement they did on September the 9th on X are an amusing way to help us wrap up the show. So I've got a list of some of the comments that were made on X, on Twitter, about the announcement and the nominees that I thought would be fun for us to read. So I will do them one at a time, and there's one in particular that I want to do at the end, but I'll let us alternate them. So who wants to go first?
I can go first, I guess.
All right.
I didn't think it could get sadder than the virtual PowerPoint presentation people paid to vote in, and then you brought it to a vomit-encrusted Dave & Buster's. I guess Chuck E. Cheese was booked.
Y'all should just grab job applications and work at McDonald's instead. This is just an embarrassing scam.
I'm looking forward to the most divorced man and I lost my kids because of my game categories.
All right, I'll do this one. All caps on this one. And I'll try to make it so that I can actually pronounce the misspellings and things on here. So, new category, best non-political game. MGS Delta Snake Eater, Deaths, spelled D-E-S-T-H, Death Stranding 2, and Spec Ops The Line.
Oh, that's Spacops the line because they didn't hyphenate it.
You're true, it's one word. Spec Ops The Line.
Political game and Spacops the line, okay?
All right, next one. This one's a really short and simple one.
You're still trying this scam.
All right, next one for Kate.
Are you going to charge people to vote again like a greedy jerk?
And last but certainly not least, piggybacking one you already did, Kate, very simple, says, can't wait for the new category called She Took the Kids. And with that, final thoughts.
Hey, I'll find things that bring you joy that don't involve taking joy away from other people.
Yeah, this at this point feels like a just don't look situation. It feels like the general public is turning on him and kind of realized how ridiculous this is. As always, there will be people and are people who are still going to participate, but it still just seems like the court of public opinion is starting to turn. We don't have to worry necessarily about this becoming a bigger thing. I say that, who knows, but again, this feels like if it would enrage me to watch this, I'm not going to watch it. It would enrage me to follow along, so I'm not going to follow along any further than we've had to for this episode.
Yeah, I know this sounds a bit hypocritical from the attention I've given this, but don't get my recommendation for our listeners, don't give these people your attention. Don't give them your time. Don't allow them to take your oxygen, basically. They are it's I think it's fun talking about this in the sense of like the larger controversies that it calls attention to, but my advice is like don't engage with these people, even to make fun of them. I would say don't comment at them because engagement is part of what their bread and butter is, and certainly don't give them money. I would recommend. But as we can see, there are definitely people who are still willing to give them money based on the fact, like the comments you saw, like as we saw in the feed there, it's a diminishing number of people, but it's not a zero and it's never going to be a zero. But I hope that at least this calls attention to the way at least some aspects of the anti-woke griftosphere operate and some of the operators within it. And of course, they are part of a larger system of these that can extend to media in general, of course. Movies have this attention too. Think of the discourses around, popular films like Star Wars movies or Marvel movies we've talked about in the past, and also to larger culture war things. This is a small piece of a larger pie, as it were, in terms of these, like, basically getting angry over things that aren't really worth getting angry over, or drawing attention away from things that, actually really are problems or issues. Things I keep pointing back to in the industry, like all the, there were over 20,000 layoffs over the last few years in the games industry. That's a big thing to talk about. The fact that a consortium led by the Saudi royal family bought EA is a big thing to talk about. What's that going to mean for the business of games? What's that going to mean for the kinds of messages that EA games are going to be allowed to play? This is the company that made, for example, Mass Effect. Can they make games like that still while having this new corporate overlords? Like, I think those are the kinds of things that are a lot more worth your attention than these kinds of things. And like, it's all that's to say is like, that's something you've both pointed. Life's too short to devote attention to these guys any more than we have. I hope you listen to our shows about it, though. We've got stories for years. And I hope you'll tune in next time when I've got some other fun stories that we're going to cover. We got some really cool things coming up for 2026 that I'm really excited to share with all of you. And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Secret by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Andy Hunter.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube and listen to So We Were Talking About Beast Wars wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, both of you give me your Dave & Buster's tickets. I want to go buy a stuffy.